To the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, if a revised response to question number 2064, originally tabled on January 29, 2024, could be made an order for return, this return would be tabled in an electronic format immediately. And then I would add on to that, Madam Speaker, at this point I would then ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand.
Plaît-il à la Chambre que les questions sous-mentionnées soient transformées?
Does it please the House that the matter be tabled immediately?
Ordonné. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Agreed. Orders of the day.
Government orders, government bills comments, resuming consideration at second reading of Bill C-58, an act to amend the Canada Labour Code and the Canada Industrial Relations Board Regulations 2012.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Skeena Buckley Valley has 6 minutes and 25 seconds to complete his speech.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Workers coming together in solidarity, negotiating collectively, and at times making the very difficult decision to withhold their labor is something that has raised the material condition of working people in this country for generations and generations. This isn't a tactic or a strategy, Madam Speaker. This is something that is defined in our Constitution. It's a constitutionally protected right, and yet we've seen again and again consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments undermine the rights of workers in many ways. Of course, one of those ways is through back-to-work legislation, which we've seen repeatedly in this place. But another of the most pernicious ways that workers' rights are undermined is through the use of replacement workers. And that is the topic of the bill C-58 that I rise to speak about today on behalf of the good people of Skeena Buckley Valley. Of course, replacement workers are workers that are brought in by the employer during times of work stoppage, during lockouts and strikes, and they're brought in to do the work of unionized workers. And when employers use replacement workers, or as they're colloquially referred to as scabs, when they do so, it undermines the ability of unionized workers to negotiate and to secure improvements with their employer through the collective bargaining process. The use of replacement workers also, Madam Speaker, has a profound impact on communities, especially small communities like the ones that I represent. It increases the risk of violence on picket lines. And of course, most significantly, it removes the incentive on the part of the employer to bargain in good faith with the employees. And of course, Madam Speaker, the use of replacement workers has been documented as lengthening the duration of labor disputes. So all of these are reasons why we need to pass this historic legislation that's before us. This is a very significant contribution to the long legacy of codifying workers' rights in Canadian law. It's one that is going to allow workers to improve their lot at a time when working people in this country are falling farther and farther behind. People are having trouble putting food on the table. People are having trouble accessing the services that they need, whether those are services like pharmacare or dental care, things that we're also fighting for in this place. I'm exceptionally proud, Madam Speaker, that it's the NDP that once again has forced this historic legislation before us. In fact, the NDP has brought forward legislation to ban the use of replacement workers, not once, not twice, but 8 times over the past 15 years. And each time that it's come forward for a vote, both the Liberals and the Conservatives have voted against it, most recently in 2016. And now we've managed, as a party born and founded by Labour, we've managed to create the conditions whereby the government has had a change of heart, that they have seen the value of banning replacement workers and have chosen rightly to work with us to make sure that this historic legislation passes through this place. I can't say the same for my Conservative colleagues, Madam Speaker, and I think they're at a very important juncture when it comes to this legislation, because, of course, they're a party that wants the support of working people. And here we have a bill before us that is supported by all of the unions in Canada, by the vast majority of working people who are working under collective agreements. And they have a choice to make, whether they stand with those people to give them an important tool for ensuring that their collective bargaining rights are upheld, that their constitutional rights are protected during times of labor dispute, or whether they're going to side with the employers that wish to continue with the status quo, wish to continue with a situation whereby they're able to bring in non-union workers in order to continue production at their facilities. And of course, if production is allowed to proceed with the use of replacement workers, the leverage, the negotiating power of these unions is greatly undermined. This, of course, is legislation that has already been put in place in my home province of British Columbia, something that I'm very proud of, that we have a progressive provincial government that has seen the value of banning replacement workers. And the reality is that the sky hasn't fallen. We've had this legislation in place for some time, and we've seen collective bargaining proceed. We've seen workers manage to negotiate in good faith with their employers and secure benefits that they so rightly deserve. Madam Speaker, I had a chance to attend the press conference on the day that this bill was tabled in this House, right out here in the foyer of the House of Commons. And standing there listening to labor leaders who have been working on this for decades and decades, hearing them say that this is legislation that working people have been trying to secure for almost as long as Canada has existed. It was an emotional moment. It really underlined the significance, the historic significance of this bill that's before us. I'll end by recognizing the hard work of my colleague, the member for Rosemont-La Petite-Patrie, who worked hard with the Minister of Labour to hammer out this bill that we have before us. We want to see it brought into force as quickly as possible, and I sincerely hope, Madam Speaker, that it passes through this place unanimously. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to correct the Honourable Member on one point. In 2021, the Liberal election platform did specifically mention that we are going to bring in legislation to prohibit these replacement workers, and the mandate letter issued to the Ministry of Labour in December 2021 also included this specific thing. I would like to ask the member, I'm glad that British Columbia and Quebec have got similar legislation in places. Does he agree with me that it's time all provinces and territories, all provinces should also bring in similar legislation to protect the interests of the workers?
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Buckley Valley.
Thank you to my colleague across the way. On his second point, I very much agree that every province should bring in similar bans on the use of replacement workers for provincially regulated workplaces. Absolutely. British Columbia and Quebec have led the way, and it's time for other provinces to follow suit. On his first point, I'm always open to being corrected, but usually more when I'm wrong, and the point that I was making is that his party has voted against anti-scab legislation again and again. Yeah. He mentioned the Liberal platform, and I recognize that there was a commitment in the Liberals platform. His party commits to a lot of things in their election platform, and that does not always result in them moving those things forward when they form government. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Speaker. The key difference here is that this legislation applies to both strikes and lockouts, while the election platform commitment by the Liberal Party did not. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
It's clear that the member from Skeena-Buckley Valley is passionate about this legislation and talked about how he was able to talk their coalition partners with the Liberals into it. But I'm interested to know why the Liberals didn't include in the scope of this bill the federal PSAC workers, because they had 120,000 of them go on strike, and you would think if they thought it was such a terrific idea that they would want to extend this bill to cover not replacing those workers. Does the member have any thoughts on that?
Member for Skeena-Buckley Valley.
I thank my colleague from Sarnia-Lambton for the question. I think it's a good one, it's a fair one, and it's a good question to pose to the party across the way when they speak on this topic. It's something that we support, absolutely. Now, when we drag the governing party kicking and screaming to see the value of the legislation that we've been fighting for decades and decades, that's a negotiation. And when that negotiation doesn't go as far as we would like it to go, we're still going to secure wins for working people. And the question about why it doesn't go as far as it should really rests with the folks across the way. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like my colleague mentioned, there are civilian employees in the armed forces who are in a lockout situation. They see scabs replacing them. The government seems to be doing nothing about it, despite the current bill. In the port of Quebec City, there are people who have been in lockout for the past 2 years, I believe. This bill does not include those who are currently in a lockout or strike situation. Is that a failure in the bill that my colleague would like to see rectified as rapidly as possible?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague from the bloc raises an important point, which is that this legislation, which is still being debated and still has to make its way through the other place, does nothing for workers who are right now facing conditions that could be alleviated by this legislation. I think that underlines the importance of passing this bill through this place as quickly as possible and not waiting 18 months after the time it's brought into force for its terms to take effect, but to ensure that workers are protected by its provisions as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. That's something that I believe we share as a priority, and I hope it's something that we can see strengthened in this legislation before us.
A very brief question from the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
From Skeena-Bulkley Valley. Given the history of trade unions in this country, can he make the case quickly for how passing C-58 is good for economic stability in Canada?
Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to my friend from Saanich Gulf Islands. Her question was about economic stability, and I think the fact that without replacement worker legislation, work stoppages have been longer than they have been in provinces that have legislation like this in place. So bargaining in good faith with unionized employees that have the protection of legislation like this will create stability. That's what the evidence suggests. And when workers do better, everyone in our country does better. That is what stability looks like.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this House and speak. Today we're talking about C-58, which is the legislation that would ban replacement workers. And so I think I do have some relevant experience on all sides of this issue, being the daughter of somebody whose mother was a teacher who went on strike, and whose father was a member of the Canadian Auto Workers Union, who went on strike. My daughter is a nurse. My other daughter is a teacher. I was married to a union welder, a proud member of Local 663, one of the 5,000 union members in Sarnia-Lambton. We are well known worldwide for our high quality, high safety performance, and it is certainly considered to be a union town. At the same time, I worked for many years with Dow Chemical, and in the late 80s there was a strike, and I was a scab in the strike. So I did security and lab testing and had to cross the picket line and had the experiences of how things can escalate, you know, during those strike experiences. And so I bring all of that to my speech today, but I guess I'll start out by saying I'm very surprised to see the Liberal government come forward with this legislation, because you know, you think about how they handle their own business. They have increased the use of contractors and consultants by over 60%. It's in the billions of dollars. And so isn't that really replacement workers from the PSAC union workers that do the work? And you know, when I think about the Arrive scam situation, you know, there's a whole IT department in the government